Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, 1770–1831, one of the most influential figures in Western philosophy, developed a complex and dynamic system of thought known as dialectics. His dialectical method became a cornerstone of his entire philosophical system, shaping his views on history, logic, society, and metaphysics. Often misunderstood and sometimes caricatured, Hegel's dialectics is not merely a method of contradiction and synthesis. It is a profound philosophical approach to understanding change, development, and the self-unfolding of reason. Origins and basic structure. The dialectical method did not originate with Hegel. It has roots in ancient Greek philosophy, especially in the dialogues of Plato and the logic of Aristotle. Socratic dialectic, for example, involved a conversational process of question and answer aimed at arriving at the truth. Hegel transformed this method into something far more systematic and metaphysical. At its core, Hegel's dialectic is a process of development through contradictions. Rather than viewing contradiction as something negative or to be avoided, Hegel saw it as a vital force of progress. His famous triadic formulation, thesis, antithesis, synthesis, is often used to describe this process, although Hegel himself rarely used these terms. The dialectic involves an initial concept or position, thesis, a negation or opposition to this concept, antithesis, a higher level reconciliation or unity of the two, synthesis. This synthesis then becomes a new thesis, and the process begins anew. However, it is important to note that for Hegel, this isn't merely a formal or logical progression, but a real, dynamic unfolding of reality itself, what he called the self-development of the idea. Dialectics in Logic and Metaphysics. Hegel's most detailed account of dialectics appears in his Science of Logic, 1812–1816. Here, he presents a dialectical unfolding of categories, starting from the most abstract, being, and moving toward the most concrete, absolute idea. For instance, Hegel begins with the category of being, the most abstract and indeterminate concept. But pure being, when examined closely, is indistinguishable from nothing. It has no content, no distinction, no form. This contradiction leads to the category of becoming, a synthesis that captures the dynamic movement between being and nothing. This pattern continues throughout the logic. Every category reveals internal tensions that lead to its negation and eventual resolution in a more comprehensive category. Hegel's aim is not simply to classify concepts, but to demonstrate how thought itself evolves in a dialectical manner, reflecting the unfolding of reality. 3. Dialectics and the Phenomenology of Spirit. In the Phenomenology of Spirit, 1807, Hegel applies the dialectical method to the development of consciousness. This work traces the journey of the human spirit from immediate sense-based awareness to absolute knowledge. Each stage of consciousness encounters internal contradictions that it must overcome, leading to a higher and more integrated form of self-awareness. One of the most famous examples in this text is the master-slave dialectic. In the struggle for recognition, two self-conscious beings confront one another. One becomes the master, the other the slave. At first, the master appears dominant. However, it is the slave, through labor and transformation of the world, who ultimately achieves self-consciousness and independence. This dialectical reversal reveals that domination is inherently unstable, and that recognition must be mutual to be genuine. This process continues through other stages: stoicism, skepticism, unhappy consciousness, until the spirit reaches the standpoint of absolute knowing, where it recognizes itself in all of reality and sees reason as the driving force behind the historical and philosophical development. And 4. Dialectics in history. Hegel famously claimed that the real is rational, and the rational is real. This means that history, though often chaotic and violent, is the unfolding of reason in time. In the philosophy of history, Hegel applies dialectical reasoning to historical progress. He argues that history progresses through a dialectical struggle for freedom. Each historical epoch represents a stage in the realization of human freedom. Ancient despotism, where only one is free, gives way to classical democracy, where some are free, and eventually to modern constitutional states, where all are, ideally, free. This historical development is driven by the world spirit, which gradually becomes conscious of its freedom. Wars, revolutions, and social upheavals are not random. They are the working out of contradictions in social and political forms. The French Revolution, for instance, is seen by Hegel as a crucial moment in the dialectical realization of liberty, even though it initially descended into terror and contradiction. 5. Dialectical idealism. Hegel's dialectic is often described as a dealist, because he believed that reality is ultimately spiritual or rational in nature. Contrary to materialist dialecticians like Karl Marx, who adapted Hegel's method, Hegel held that ideas, not material conditions, are the primary drivers of historical change. For Hegel, the real world is the manifestation of the absolute spirit, which reveals itself progressively in art, religion, and philosophy. The dialectic is thus not only logical, but also ontological. It expresses the very structure of being. Everything real contains contradictions, and these contradictions are not flaws to be eliminated, but necessary moments in the development of truth. 6. Criticisms and legacy. Hegel's dialectic has been criticized for its obscurity and abstraction. Figures like Schopenhauer dismissed it as pretentious, while analytical philosophers have often viewed it as lacking rigor. The triadic model, thesis, antithesis, synthesis, is sometimes seen as formulaic, though Hegel's actual method is far more nuanced. Nevertheless, Hegel's dialectics profoundly influenced many areas of thought. Karl Marx turned Hegel on his head by reinterpreting dialectics in materialist terms, leading to dialectical materialism. Existentialists such as Kierkegaard, a fierce critic of Hegel, and later Sartre, engaged dialectically with Hegel's concepts of selfhood, freedom, and alienation. Postmodernists like Derrida saw in Hegel an early articulation of deconstruction, given his attention to difference and contradiction. In continental philosophy, thinkers like Heidegger, Adorno, and Zizek have continued to grapple with Hegel's dialectics, often seeing it as a key to understanding the complexities of modernity. The dialectic as a way of thinking beyond formal logic or historical analysis, Hegel's dialectic teaches us a way of thinking, to see contradictions not as obstacles but as opportunities, to move beyond binary oppositions, and to recognize that development is an open, dynamic process. This mode of thinking is especially relevant today, in a world marked by polarization, complexity, and transformation. Hegel's dialectic challenges us to think beyond fixed categories, and to understand that truth is not static, but unfolds over time. It offers a vision of reality as self-developing reason, a cosmos in which freedom, spirit, and consciousness gradually come to know themselves. Hegel's dialectic is not merely a philosophical method, but a vision of the world as fundamentally dynamic, contradictory, and rational. Through his system, Hegel aimed to show that all reality, from thought to society to history, is a self-moving totality driven by internal tensions and their resolution. His dialectical approach redefined how we think about change, contradiction, and truth. Despite its difficulty and the many criticisms it has faced, Hegelian dialectics remains a vital and provocative legacy in the history of philosophy.